yes, I think P doom is high. But again, if we're only considering people that are alive today, our P doom without AGI is 100%.
Hey everybody, welcome to Doom Debates. Today I'm here with Chase Mann. He is an employee on Twitter on the business side. He says he's non-technical, and he has stepped up to the challenge of debating me about why my policy position of pausing AI isn't the right position, and he isn't even that worried about AI doom. Is that right, Chase?
That's kind of right. I actually mostly agree with you and Yudkowsky and all of them that we are probably doomed. I just kind of disagree on basically your prescription as to whether or not we should move forward with that in consideration.
Great. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm Chase Mann. Like you said, I work at X, not Twitter. How dare you?
Fair enough.
But yeah, on the business side, not technical, not an engineer or anything. So that's why I agreed to have the debate with you more on the philosophical side, because there's definitely nothing I can really say on the technical side other than that the arguments that I've heard for the doom side sound plausible. Like, I generally agree that it seems very unlikely that version 1.0 of an ASI will be aligned to human values now and kind of permanently into the future. That seems like a dubious proposition. So I'm kind of on board with that. I just disagree that that's the worst thing coming for us right now.
Totally. And it sounds like you're pretty humble about this, like you're willing to change your mind. You don't necessarily think you've thought about it super deeply. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say.
Okay, but you've been digging through like the different arguments. Like, have you read a bunch of Less Wrong, for instance?
I haven't read a bunch of it, no. A little bit here and there, but no, not much.
Okay, cool. So you told me a little bit about your position when we were talking on X. And I think my goal for this debate is going to be to just show you that there's internal inconsistencies. Like, it's just not really a workable position. It's just, yeah, like the moment you try to take that stance, there's just so many contradictions that it's like, okay, you might just want to rethink your own position. Like, I think you will actually agree on your own accord.
Entirely possible.
Sweet. Okay, great. And I also think that there may be other people who are thinking along the same lines as you who can benefit from these kind of discussions, which is why we do them.
Sure. Okay. So essentially, I agree that it is very probable that we are doomed. I'm not sure what my P doom would be exactly, but it's definitely like more than 1%, less than 99, somewhere in there. And basically, my argument here is that we are already in a doom scenario. We are already, as it stands, all 8 billion people alive right now, very definitely going to die. We all have a terminal condition called senescence, and it's going to kill us all in less than 80 years. And really, it seems to me that our one chance, because I mean, I don't think we're making very fast progress on solving the senescence problem on our own. Maybe that's one area where I could be convinced otherwise. But assuming that's not the case, it seems to me that AGI is our one chance to not have all 80 billion people alive right now die. So basically, it just kind of comes down to AGI will probably kill us. But without AGI, we're all definitely going to die. So would you rather probably die or definitely die? And then there's also questions we can get into as far as like future humans and other people that aren't currently alive right now to consider. But before we get into that, I just want to kind of give your pulse check there. Like, if we don't consider any future people, do you agree with everything so far? Or is there something you want to quibble with there?
Got it. Okay, yeah. We can factor the whole debate into what's the best way to help the people who are alive today, and what's the best way to create a good long-term future for humanity, including potentially after 80 years from now, right? Those are like two questions.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And you asked me, what if we only care about today? What would I say? If we only cared about today, because my P doom is pretty high, roughly 50%, then I would say I think it's reckless to make an AI as a Hail Mary to keep us alive. I think the obvious way to keep us alive is to do cryonics and then just go work on building safe AI over 50 years or however long that takes.
So that might work. My concern there is one, cryonics as it currently stands, as far as I understand, doesn't really work. Like there's ice crystals and it's not really reversible and there's lots of damage done in the process. So I think it's dubious that even an ASI would ever be able to revive people in cryonics as it currently stands. Although I did just hear that they've made some progress recently in like freezing a single cell and like without damaging it. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So last time I checked, the vitrification process, where you can pump a certain type of liquid, a cryoprotectant, into somebody's brain and then cool it down with liquid nitrogen and just keep it in that state, the expert estimates that I've seen just say that that looks like it probably does preserve a vast majority of the critical information about how neurons are connected up in the brain, such that a sufficiently good AI scanner can take a look and be like, okay, I know how to upload this and restore, or I know how to do an operation to take these exact neurons and reanimate them. Like, that seems pretty good theoretically. I mean, I'm not saying I'm necessarily more than 50% confident that it'll work, but there's no fundamental reason it shouldn't work. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I agree. There's no fundamental reason it shouldn't work. I guess there's two problems there. One, yeah, like if your PDOOM is 50% and your percentage chance, your probability on this working is less than 50%, that should still make you go towards AGI, I think. But even if we think that it is more likely, the other issue is that only a small amount of like relatively wealthy people even have that as an option at all. Like the vast majority of the 8 billion people alive today, there's no way they're going to be cryonically preserved. I don't see any like
Okay,
path to
so
that
I think we
realistically.
we might be able to agree on the crux of the disagreement, which is I think the crux of the disagreement is which one has a higher probability of working, building AGI really fast or cryonics, right? And whichever
Mhm.
one has the higher probability of working, if we just care about present people, we should probably just prioritize that and not the other, right?
Well, with the further stipulation that if you think it's actually, even if chronics works, it's also plausible to get some critical number of the 80 billion people currently alive into that.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So just to handle that, I actually think cryonics is not expensive at all, actually. So anybody who has any sort of job in the US, anybody who's going to make a few $1 million over the course of their career, it's actually straightforward to buy life insurance and assign that over to the cryonics. And you're just looking at payments on the order of maybe $1,000 a year for that guarantee that they'll go shell out like $80,000 when you die to get you cryopreserved. So it's not going to break the bank for an average person to do cryonics today.
Well, so maybe for like the average American right now, but there's 8 billion and most of those aren't in America. But even with that,
Mhm.
like that will help you if you die like when you're 45. But like as you get, if you try to get life insurance when you're 80, it gets a lot more expensive around then. Even if you want to like
Let me ask you
designate that
this.
for.
Okay, before AI looked like it was short timelines, right? It's like 2 years
Mhm.
ago or whatever. Were you running around telling everybody to sign up for cryonics who could afford $1,000 a year? Is that a priority for you?
No, but I didn't really know about it back then.
Okay.
Like back then, well, maybe 2 years ago, but sometime before all of this AI stuff started, I never really even considered the possibility of living beyond our 80-year lifespan. So it just didn't like occur to me one way or the other.
But now it's like your primary consideration.
I don't know if I'd say primary because I still think it's a very low likelihood of working either way. Like I don't
Mhm.
like my all my energy isn't on this because I still think I still am very convinced that I'm probably going to die. So I wouldn't say primary, but yeah.
I think there may also be a contradiction in your revealed preference or your revealed beliefs because, like, let's say your ideal scenario that you seem to be banking everything on is we're gonna rush to AGI because we need to make it happen in our lifetime, and you get
Mhm.
lucky and it's coming in 10 years, right? Let's say your holy
Sure.
grail is coming. Are you signed up for cryonics now?
I'm not, but I agree. I probably should be.
Okay. All right. Just pointing that out because if you get hit by a truck, right, sometime in the next 10 years, that's unfortunate because you just needed to be cryopreserved for a few more years and then the holy grail of good AI would have saved you.
Right. Well, two things. One, like we already said before, I'm not sure that cryonics as it currently stands really works, but I agree that regardless of that, the math says I should sign up for it either way. So, uh, this is kind of a do as I say, not as I do situation. I should be doing that for sure.
Okay. I mean, it's just like, it's fine, but it's just, you really are betting big on this premise, philosophical premise that it's all about maximizing the current people who are alive today, their chance
Mhm.
at immortality. Right?
Sure.
It's like that's what you're focusing everything on, and you're going to make some serious trade-offs. Like you're going to say, let's do a reckless project that doesn't look like it's going to work because it's so important for the people alive today not to die.
Well, it's only reckless if we think that like potential future humans are real in some sense, in the sense that they have like they're worthy of moral consideration. If we're not considering them, then I'd say it's not reckless at all. It's kind of like,
No,
is
no,
it
fair. And
reckless to
I'm
get?
not even
Is
I'm
it?
not even getting to the argument of whether we should value future people's lives. I'm just saying you care. Let's say future people don't matter, but you care so much about extending the life of present people that you're willing to bank it all on an AI project that looks like it's pretty high P doom. Like friendly AI doesn't look super likely, but you're saying damn the torpedoes, whatever, right? Like let's just go full speed ahead. Um,
Yeah.
and it seems to imply that you just really care about the current people not dying, and I just that particular value that you claim to have just doesn't seem consistent with like other choices you've made.
Well, it's kind of like, imagine you had terminal cancer and you were given 6 months to live, and they were like, "Hey, we have this super experimental treatment that's probably going to kill you in 3 months instead of
Mhm.
the six that you had before. Do you want to take it?" And I think my answer would be, yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah, yeah, but you're signing up for this super risky treatment, and it's not really like a daily thing on your mind of like, hey, we got to make sure we got to promote cryonics, right? Like you're not really out there advocating for cryonics, despite it being an ambulance ride to a good AI future.
Well, that's just because I'm a private citizen, don't really advocate for anything. But if I
Okay, okay,
were
okay.
to go advocate for things, then I would
Okay,
probably be advocating for cryonics. Yeah.
so it sounds like on a logical level, it sounds like I believe I'm successfully convincing you of like, in addition to advocating for let's build AGI as fast as we can, you should also be advocating for like let's bring cryonics to the masses, let's lower down the price, let's get universal cryonics.
Yes, I agree. And if it was possible, and I would even say that if that seemed like a possible scenario that we could get it cheap enough to where the vast majority of people could get it, if that seemed like
Mhm.
a very likely possible future, I would say, okay, yeah, pause AGI, let's do that instead. That's
Yeah, we
safer.
could probably get cryonics down to five, maybe $10,000 per person total. I mean, putting somebody in a tank of liquid nitrogen after pumping vitrifying liquid in their brain, it's just not that hard, right? Like 5,000
Yeah,
a
but then
person is doing.
we have to keep all of those icicles around for I don't know how long, but just
Yeah, I mean,
billions of
long-term
that's a lot of
refrigeration is not
infrastructure.
that expensive. I mean, you just pack them in, and when you have a bunch of really cold stuff packed together, you can keep the whole cube cold pretty easily. I mean, you could just like put them underground. Like cryonics is actually fundamentally a very easy problem.
Yeah, but I don't think practically it'll work, because even if there's another problem, which is I guess a bit more controversial, but it's just the idea that even if we did kind of get it cheap, I think the vast majority of people alive wouldn't go for it. I just don't think most people would. Most people like don't even know what we're talking about. They wouldn't be into this. But if AGI came along and said, "Hey, we can cure aging," I think people can kind of get behind that. Like, oh, I can just take this pill or whatever and stop aging. Like,
Mhm.
sure. It's as opposed to like, hey, do you want to sign up to be like frozen forever when you die? I don't know.
Mhm.
It seems like a harder sell. But I say that's more controversial because now we're talking about like saving people against their consent or something.
Mhm.
That's a different conversation.
Okay, so I think I might be able to give you some amount of concession and say something like, if P doom is, let's say, only 1%, if we all agree, yeah, there's a 1% chance that building AGI in the next decade is going to kill everybody and burn the future. If that chance is only 1%, and then there's all this upside, then that's pretty tempting to me, right? I can imagine being like, yeah, let's race. I mean, if there's going to be such a great future. So I do think that it's a load bearing claim. I think it's part of the crux of our disagreement of whether P Doom is more like 1% or more like 10 to 90%.
Would you
Does
give
that
me a
seem
little
like it
bit more?
cracks?
Would you say that the argument holds as long as your probability of cryonics working and being scalable being a lower chance than AGI succeeding, or a higher chance than AGI succeeding? No, sorry,
Well,
lower.
the
Yeah,
the thing
lower.
that it's well, I think there's some correlation here, right? Because if you tell me does cryonics work or not work, like I think the key question of whether cryonics works is whether we're going to have AGI that can read off these preserved neurons, right? I feel like that's the hardest part of getting cryonics to work. Like just the idea
Sure.
of making sure to preserve the neurons and keeping them cold is like much easier. Now, of course, there could be a part I'm missing, like maybe we preserve the neurons, but it turned out that the quantum entanglement inside the neuron was the key, and we didn't preserve that at all, right? So there's always like a few percent chance of that kind of thing. But I really think that the biggest point of failure of cryonics is the restore part of the operation. And if you're telling me
Sure.
that what's the probability of getting to good AGI, I feel like you get restorable cryonics out of that equation. Like that comes for free, most likely. Um, so
I agree.
so
I
yeah.
agree that if it's possible to do, like, that, AGI or ASI will eventually be able to do it. It just, but if we do it in a way that's just really not reversible, like if at the, like you said, like the quantum level or even just the microscopic level, like the cells are just broken and there's really no way even an insanely smart AI could go in there and connect everything back together in the way that it was, in a way that restores the original consciousness. Another problem being we don't even really know what that is or how that works. Then that's really the crux. The crux of the problem is, are we today making it possible for even a super smart thing to do it? And if you're like, basically, how likely do you think it is that we're doing at least right enough for something to work out all of the terrible job we did eventually?
Right. I mean, if you let me assume in a particular case that, like, let's say I die, but my brain gets frozen by the current standards of cryonics. It's not like smashed by a boulder or whatever, like it's successfully cryopreserved. And also you grant me that the coolant stays cool, and you grant me that we get super intelligent AI. If you grant me all of those things, then conditioned on all of that, my personal probability of cryonics successfully working becomes like, I don't know, 75% at least, right? I guess, and a lot of the extra 25% could just be like, oh, we didn't know which part of the brain needed to be preserved and we preserved it wrong, right? So that can go in the last 25%. But I feel like my P cryonics working becomes quite high. What do you think?
I think that's fair. So I think if that is the case, then I think it's rational for you, like selfishly, to prefer the cryonics route. So my only addition to that would be that I guess you need to factor into your probability if you wanted to expand that beyond just yourself is, do you think that like basically how much does it lower your credence if we add the additional task of we need to get everyone, or at least the majority of the world, into these cryonics tubes within, I don't know within how long, but less than 80 years.
Right. Yeah. And that's a good humanitarian mission, right? To think, can we save everybody? And if you ask me, what does it take to save everybody with cryonics? I think it's a very simple answer of just the will, right? The political will, the groundswell. Because if everybody woke up tomorrow and says we all need to have cryonics, I think within a year, maybe two at most, I think we just make it happen. Like there's no big bottleneck besides people wanting to do it.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. But like, that's a lot harder problem than it sounds like to spread that
Yeah, of
will
course,
across the
in
world.
countries that are also that have famine, right? The same political issues are going to, of course, prevent cryonics. Cryonics is probably
Right.
harder than
Whereas
feeding
like
people.
AGI, on the other hand, you don't need all of this massive organization around the world. This is like one, OpenAI can do this by themselves and save the world alone. They don't need to get everyone bought in like you need for cryonics.
Okay, cool. So I think we're kind of agreeing that cryonics is a viable ambulance ride to the future where AGI goes well, right?
Yeah,
So I guess
probably.
my key point is just like, okay, great. So why don't we just make sure that P doom is low before we take the gamble on AGI? In other words, like, why don't we let safety progress instead of being like, we need it as fast as possible?
Because we might uh we might all be dead by then. Okay, so yes, I agree that in the world where we can get like cooperation around the world and get everyone rolling on cryonics, then I would say, yeah, let's pause AGI for as long as it takes to get that right. I just don't think that world is likely. I think it's much more likely. Like I basically, I think it is more likely that we save everyone with AGI, because AGI, as hard of a problem it is, doesn't require the buy-in that cryonics
Mhm.
does, and then you add that to the fact that
Yeah. So
there's some
summarizing your
chance that
current
cryonics isn't
position,
going to work in any way.
which sounds like you may still be refining it, but current position is like, look, we could try to get everybody signed up for cryonics and then go slower to get to AGI, but it's going to be a better chance of success if we just go as fast as possible to AGI, and that way we don't have to get the groundswell for cryonics, even though we might get a bad AI, right? Like that's basically your position.
Yeah, essentially. Like I
Yeah.
don't think we're going to get
Okay.
that buy-in globally. I don't think that would
So,
happen.
I mean, maybe there's like one key number that is the crux of our disagreement, which is basically P doom from AI, I think, right? So like if you're P doom from reckless AI, right? P doom from going at the current pace toward AGI and at the current pace toward safety, which is a slow pace. My P doom would be something like 50%, probably even more, maybe 70% conditioned, because
That sounds right.
the reason I normally quote my P doom as 50% is because I'm also factoring in successful pause AI movements, right? And everybody getting as scared as I am when so if you say nope, there's no movement, like we just get reckless AGI, then my P doom becomes, let's say, 70% by 2040 or by whenever I predict that the AGI is coming. Whereas if your P Doom was more like 1% or 7%, I think that's just the crux of our disagreement. Because I can imagine if my P Doom becomes 1%, then I'm like, okay, yeah, forget about cryonics. Just like take the 1% gamble. Let's just go build AGI and we have a 99% chance of heaven. So let's do it, right? Is that basically the crux?
Yeah, I'd say that's fair. It just depends on what your overall number is for cryonics plus like world cooperation to actually get most people into cryonics.
Yeah, well, I think, we could probably give a similar estimate on that. Like, I agree that that's like a key number of can we get the people in ambulance ride to the future, I guess. My probability of like if elites, if people like us who know how to do a good debate and change our mind, if we could all get convinced that cryonics, universal cryonics, is the way to go to save humanity, I feel like the probability is like at least 30% that we could like mobilize most of humanity onto cryonics. What do you think?
I honestly don't know. I have no idea what number to put on that.
Okay. I mean,
But yeah, I will agree
it's
that it's
interesting.
30%. Like that's not an insane number, I guess. If everyone like, yeah, like if everyone at the highest levels of government was like, yeah, this makes sense. Let's do this. That
It's
sounds right.
interesting that in your view, convincing people to do cryonics for their own good is like such a key bottleneck that we now have to go build AGI for their own good because they're too stupid to go sign up for cryonics for their own good, right? Is that basically your worldview?
Um, I don't know if I put it like that. Like, uh, it's it's not necessarily that they're like too stupid. It's just that this is a you have to get people to believe a lot of things to convince them that this is the best way to do it. Add that to the fact of cryonics just being hard, period. Like one, you have to convince them that AGI is a thing because a lot of people don't even think like they just think this is a silly notion. You have to convince them it's true. You have to convince them that doom is very real. You have to convince them that cryonics is not this crazy cult thing and that you can actually do it and it's okay. And that it's not against your religion. You can do this, and you have to convince like the governments and then the world to kind of like unite on this common goal. And
Hmm.
then you have to actually practically do it, which is still going to be very hard and also has some chance of failure even if we did it. So
Yeah,
there's just
well,
like there's a lot of factors there.
the interesting thing about cryonics though is it's not a coordination problem per se, not in the game theoretic sense, because any individual who goes and makes preparations for cryonics gets a personal benefit from their own effort, right?
Yeah, that sounds very rational, but I
Right. So if
just don't think
that's
that
what I'm
might
saying,
work.
if everybody woke up tomorrow and said, "I want to be cryopreserved," right? I don't care about anybody else. I want to be cryopreserved because that's good for me. Then the coordination would work itself out. Like capitalism is actually perfectly well suited for this particular problem, right? Like maybe capitalism is not necessarily suited for things like climate change or avoiding AI doom, but it is suited for having everybody go purchase the cryonics that they want if they understood how good cryonics was.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, maybe. It seems I just it's really hard for me to imagine a world in the near term future where everyone's just like going out and doing this and talking about this like it's a normal thing. But I agree that that is like potentially possible, and if that were possible, and if it was more likely than AGI going well, that should be the route we take.
Okay, great. And I'll also note the reason we're even focusing so much on cryonics, which is something that's more relevant to the people alive today, is because I know you're passionate about saving the people alive today, and you have a separate philosophical point we can get into in a second, which is like you just don't want to put moral weight on people who may be alive in the future, and so that's why I'm humoring you, and I'm like, great, let's just only care about the people today,
Right.
you and me and our current families, forget about their kids for now. So I've just been humoring you, which is fine, like because I think that it most of my argument, most of our difference in beliefs, I think does still apply in asking just how to save the people alive today, and that's why I keep narrowing it down to PAI doom. I really still think that's the crux, right? And I was going to say to summarize my recommendation, I think that if your P doom is only 1%, you should go for the Hail Mary, right? Just step on the gas, develop AGI because look, people are dying. Let's go take the 99% gamble of like saving the world, building heaven.
Mhm.
I think somewhere in between 1% and 30% to put a broad interval, by the time your P doom is up to 30%, then I think it becomes crazy to say, okay, let's do it because we have a 70% chance of succeeding. Like, I don't think 70% is high enough given that you can slow down, lower that P doom from 30% to 5% or whatever, and then just do cryonics. So it's like, it's not that big of a problem to buy time so you can lower your P doom. So then I guess I just have to ask the question, like, do you have any idea if your P doom is more like 1% or 50%?
I'd say it's closer to like I don't know, somewhere around 50%. It's not 1% for sure. It
Yeah.
might even
So,
be higher. It's just that I
geez.
put an even,
Okay. I mean, that's
I
pretty
put a
funny.
pretty high percentage chance on doom. I just put an even higher chance on that coordination problem and technological problem with cryonics working out for everyone.
Okay.
Failing.
So so that's interesting because my point just now was like, hey, if your P doom is really high like mine is, then you shouldn't think that building AI recklessly makes sense because cryonics is a available option. And you basically have two arguments. You're saying you're really pessimistic about people waking up to how much they need to sign up for cryonics. And number two, you really don't care about the future world, so you want to go all out on the current generation, right? Those are your two arguments.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's essentially right. I
Okay.
would just to summarize there. I would say my P cryonics failing for either technical or coordination reasons is something like failing is like something like 80%, while AGI
Yeah.
doom is something like 50%. Is like a
And
good way to summarize that.
let me just ask you one more time. This may be a little redundant, but just condition on this. Condition on a world where every time people come on the Doom Debates podcast, anytime intellectuals discuss the matter, they all agree P Doom from building AI recklessly is 50%. So, like the Jan LeCuns of the world come out and say, oh, I was wrong. It's not 0.1%, it's 50%. This is super reckless. So, everybody gets on the same page as like Jeff Hinton or Eliezer Yudkowsky. And there's mass consensus on that. And that consensus starts propagating into like other policies and stuff. Even in that world, then you still think cryonics is not going to happen?
So if we're in that world, uh, then I think that it has a. If we actually do find ourselves in that world and we progress down that railroad track, I think that definitely increases my credence in cryonics working out. So really, this is all on you, Ron. This
Right.
is
Well, that, I mean, that's, you know, the
if you
reason I'm
can
bringing up that
succeed at this
hypothetical.
podcast, you might convince me over.
I mean, yeah, it's funny because normally when two people are talking on the street, they're like, yeah, people are frozen in their beliefs. But the point of this podcast, Doom Debates, the point of this forum is to be upstream of people's beliefs, right? We're trying to write down what the correct beliefs are. So if we're saying all it takes is for people to have the correct beliefs and to see reason, and that will propagate to all these great actions like get everybody on the ambulance ride that is cryonics, let's do that. Let's start propagating, right? We actually have a productive thing we can do here in this Doom debate. So like you
All right,
coming out of this Doom debate saying like I was convinced that cryonics will work and we should, we should have a high P Doom and act accordingly, right? Like that would be productive.
I agree. Yeah, good. Best of luck on all of your
Okay.
future efforts because
All right,
this
sounds
is
good.
all on your shoulders right now. But yeah, if you do move the conversation, or obviously not just you, but if the conversation does move in that direction, it becomes much more likely that the coordination problem won't be an issue. Then yeah, that would change my position. I'd be like, all right, cool, let's pause AGI then.
Okay, great, great, great. And also, it's funny because most of the debates on this podcast, most of the stops on what I call the Doom train are going to be debates about what P Doom is, right? Whether it's 1%, whether it's 50%. And so it's funny that you're like, no, I've already followed you on all these stops where I think P Doom is super high, but I just think we're so screwed that it's just one crazy Hail Mary or the other, and I pick the crazy Hail Mary of building AGI that seems like it's going to kill us.
Yes, I'm getting off on a very late stop on the Doom
Right.
train. Yeah,
Or potential, yeah, a very late stop, but also I don't know, maybe even a very early stop, which is like I don't care what P Doom is, so don't.
sure.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't even know where I'd order the stops. Okay, great. So I think we've talked about like the present generation and cryonics and what the crux is. I think the last thing that we want to talk about is the way that you're not even considering the moral weight of the entire future, whereas many people would say that even just like the years 2100 to 2200, like the medium term future, right? Not even forget about the year like 1 billion, just like the next century would likely have like a trillion sentient minds on it just in our local region of the galaxy and arguably be worth a lot more than like the entire moral weight of all of the past and present. And you're just saying like, no, we got to treat it as a zero, right? That's your position.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So
Yeah, maybe summarize your position.
yeah, let me summarize that a little bit. So essentially, uh, I just don't think like future potential beings just they don't exist. They're not real, and it doesn't really make sense to consider them as if they are real. Like it leads you to all sorts of, I think, pretty absurd, like hyper pronatalist conclusions if you consider morally. Actually, before I say that, just let me be clear. I'm not like a psychopath. I do really want, like, I have a very strong aesthetic preference for there to be a future with billions and trillions of happy humans spread across the galaxy. Like, I want that. I would be happy on my deathbed if I knew that was coming. I'm not like an antinatalist or something like that. I definitely want all that to happen. I just think that that's an aesthetic preference, and it comes second to ethical decisions that we need to make. Because like, for one example I'll give, like if I said, hey, Laron, push this kid into this volcano and I will guarantee that 10 kids are born somewhere in America that would not have otherwise been born. I think most people's intuitions would agree that like, if you push that kid, you're a monster. Like that, like, because that kid is a real person that I think we have some type of moral obligation to, even if it's at very least it's to not harm them. Whereas I think we have zero moral obligation to people that don't exist, in the sense that I don't think we have any obligation to bring non-existent beings into existence. Because I think we kind of make this error when we're thinking about potential beings, or we're like, in some sense, considering them as if they already exist in some way. And like, they're just kind of like sitting in a waiting room somewhere waiting to get their shot at existence. And if we fail to bring them in, then they're missing out on something. But in reality, no, there is no being that's being deprived of anything if we fail to bring them into existence.
So I agree that there is like a strong point of the argument where you say like, if somebody's alive today, we should care about them more than somebody that's not even alive yet, right? Like there's surely some sense in which we should care about them more. I mean, I agree that that's like a strong intuition, and I think you made a strong case of like, look, would you stick a knife into somebody right now if that would create two more babies? I would not, right? That doesn't seem like a good way to go. So like I agree there's like something to your argument. I think the type of argument you're making is, there's a big class of arguments like this, which is basically saying like, boy, it's so hard to do utilitarian reasoning. So like, let's just throw it all out. Let's throw out utilitarian reason, because like, look at these like tough dilemmas that utilitarian reasoning gives us. So instead, here's like this huge rule of thumb you can use instead, right? This like blunt rule of thumb you can use instead. But the problem is that the blunt rule of thumb also gives you like a million thorny edge cases, right? So it's not as simple as being like, I don't like utilitarianism or I don't like long-termism, so here's a blunt rule of thumb, because I can equally well nitpick your blunt rule of thumb. So like, let me take a stab at nitpicking your rule of thumb of like, ignore future people.
Sure.
A couple things that come to mind. So number one is just that like, you let's say, so I have my kids today, and what if my kids really want to have kids? So shouldn't I like plan on maximizing the welfare of my kids? Shouldn't I plan ahead toward that?
So what I would say to that is it's different if you are like planning to bring someone into existence. Like, and like a good example of this I would say is like, if you're planning to have an abortion, like I'm pro-choice up to 20 weeks. So I think like if you're planning to have an abortion, that's fine. If you are planning to have an abortion at 10 weeks and you like start drinking heavily at 5 weeks, I don't think you're doing anything wrong there. But if you start drinking heavily at 5 weeks and you are not going to have an abortion, you're going to bring that baby to term, then you are harming a future person. Like that person is going to be born and you will have harmed them. So I think that's kind of like the difference there. Like if you are planning to bring someone into existence, then yes, you should plan accordingly and try to make their existence happy. But if not, it's different, because like if I'm planning to bring this person to existence, then I am depriving them or hurting them if I do something bad. But if I don't, that's very different, because there is no one to have been deprived if I never even bring them into existence.
Okay, but if you look at like the United States government, aren't we planning ahead toward the population being in a certain ballpark and making preparations for that? So should those count now as moral patients because of that planning?
They should count insofar as we should plan that if they are going to exist, they should have good lives. But that doesn't make it so that that doesn't commit you to bring them to existence just because we plan to bring them into existence. It commits you to giving them a good life if they do come into existence.
Let's say there's some resource like a school that for some reason is really slow to build. Like it's going to take me 20 years to build this school, and it's going to be for a future generation. Should we just not build any such schools because we're investing in the future and the future is worth zero?
No, you should invest in that school because you are planning to have people there that are going to live and they're going to need education. But if you're not planning to,
but aren't we fine as a species planning to colonize the galaxy?
Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like you made it a big precondition. Like you need to have a plan. Once you have a plan, then we get to treat future people in the plan as moral patients. So shouldn't we just start treating a trillion future humans as moral patients?
The crux isn't that you need to have a plan. The crux is that it's kind of like the morality here is like based on intentions. It's like if you fail to do this, then you're like kind of like guilty of conspiracy to harm. Like if I am planning to have this person exist and I am setting them up for failure, I'm setting them up to have a bad life, then I'm doing something wrong. But if I just decide, like if you decide to have a kid with your wife and you decide like, hey, we're gonna like beat the crap out of this kid once they're born, that's terrible. But if you guys think the same, and I just say, hey, actually, we were just planning to have a kid last night, but let's just not do that. I don't think you've done anything wrong by deciding not to have the kid.
So just to recap, so it sounds like you're kind of departing from utilitarianism that kind of naively says future lives are probably worth something. You're trying to depart from that, and you're getting into your own world that you're trying to make it up. You're trying to lay down some rules, and one of the rules you're trying to lay down is like sins of omission versus sins of commission, right?
No, I'm trying to say that it doesn't, like, whether the sense omission or commission doesn't matter. Just my point is that you can only harm beings that exist. If they're going to exist in the future and you do something to set them up for harm, sure, that's bad. But if they're not going to exist, or if you prevent their existence, that's just a different. You're not harming anyone. You're not
right. But it sounds like
depriving anyone.
You keep referring back to this concept of like, do we know in the present that they're going to exist? And if the answer is yes, then even if they don't exist, we have to treat them as well as if they do. Am I describing your framework accurately here?
I wouldn't say that you have to say like like it, because you could be guilty of like,
or like you use the term like we're planning for them to exist, right?
Or something. Yeah, like if you're planning, or if and if it turns out that they don't actually exist, like if you plan for them to exist and they don't, then you can say that you didn't actually do anything bad. It would be similar to like attempted assault, like or conspiracy to like punch someone. Like, I was planning to punch someone, but they weren't actually there on the street corner when I planned to beat them up. So you can still say like, yeah, it was wrong to plan to do that, but you didn't actually end up doing something wrong, I guess, because you didn't, they weren't there to be hurt. So
like if you think ahead to like the year 2035, like how many humans are currently being planned for right now in your view?
That I don't know, that billions probably,
like ballpark. Yeah, so ballpark.
Billion? I don't know.
So there's 8 billion alive today. So in your moral framework, the rough number of people that we should treat as future moral patients is 8 billion, as opposed to like 80 billion or 1 billion. Like you just think the correct number to treat as moral patients is like still 8 billion.
No, so I'm trying to think how to describe this a different way, because it's not that like once you've decided to, like, if you've decided, hey, we're going to have this person, just making that decision does not make them a moral agent, in the sense that now I owe them existence. Now, like, I've planned for it, so now I have to bring them into existence. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if they are going to exist and you do something now that is going to hurt them later, that's bad. But just deciding not to make them exist is not bad, because if they don't exist now or in the future, they cannot be a moral agent. They cannot be a morally relevant being.
I think I get that part, right? But ultimately, the reason we're talking about this is just because, like, it gets back to the idea of, should we build AGI recklessly? Because in addition to potentially killing the current generation, we're killing way more future humans than ever have lived, right? I mean, we're talking about.
But you're not. That's
not.
That's
yeah, just to finish the
Sure, sorry.
my side of the argument, or like the steel man the other side. It's like the number of future consciousnesses that we are potentially giving up if we recklessly build AI it's got to be at least 10 to the 20. It's probably more than 10 to the 30 compared to like 10 to the 10 humans who have ever existed, right? So we're talking about massive orders of magnitude difference in what we have on the table that we're about to potentially wipe out, compared to what's in our experience. I mean, this is crazy, right? This is like a tiny. The numbers are mind bending, and it's like, no, let's just cut off that whole future, right? So to me, that seems like very scary and unwise.
Well, see, okay, so that's where I disagree, because you're saying that we're like wiping out or killing these future beings. That's where I'm trying to say, like, no, you're not, because they don't exist. So maybe like a good way to put it is, you can hurt a future being in a sense, like if they do exist in the future and you did something now that's going to set them up to be hurt in the future, that is something you can do and is wrong. But you cannot kill a future being before they exist, because they can be hurt in the future, but they can't be killed before they're like, if they
I hear you.
never exist,
what you're
that's a very
explaining is
different category.
You're explaining a pretty common stance, right? So like I get your clarifications, right? I think most people kind of know where you're coming from on that view. But what I'm getting at, my line of argument is just saying like, okay, so today you value 8 billion beings in your moral framework. And I'm just trying to get a sense of like, okay, so you basically think that you're going to value about 8 billion beings in 10 years. But what if
Oh no.
we
Uh,
what if we
so
have plans to
maybe
colonize the
sorry.
galaxy, right? Like what if we had a concrete plan? Like Elon Musk is leading like, yep, there's going to be like billions of people on Mars, billions of people on Saturn, whatever. There's like a concrete plan to expand throughout the galaxy, and I'm just telling you there's a milestone on the roadmap that like in the year 2100, there's going to be 1 trillion humans. Okay? That's on the roadmap. There's a lot of plans for it. In that case, you're just like, well, we should still treat it as zero.
Yes, but I'm saying like if they do, if I found myself in that future, I would care about those trillions of people. Like I guess maybe like to maybe make this more concrete, like if you and your wife decide to have a kid and you change your mind, do you think that you have killed that future person?
No, I think it's fine for people to change their mind about future humans, but like, just I'm just clarifying your claim. Like, you think in a hypothetical scenario where we're just planning to colonize the galaxy and we're planning to have trillions of humans, you still think that making a decision whose downside is to cut off that future is just we should just weight that equally bad as only killing the current generation.
As only killing the current
Yeah, like the
generation.
current generation say is 8 billion. So imagine a decision where you kill all 8 billion, but you still leave the future and you get 1 trillion eventually. Compared to a decision where you just cut off the entire future and you're like, yeah, they're both equally bad.
See that gets weird because now like from that you're considering that from like this outside perspective where in this picture you've painted it's essentially like those billion people in that like scenario B or those trillions of people in scenario B like already exist in this equation. But that's from our standpoint that's just not the case. Like those people in the future like it's weird to even like refer to them because there's not actually like a reference there. They don't exist unless and until we create them. And so I just for the same reason I don't think it's wrong to decide not to have a kid when you were decided to yesterday with your wife. I don't think it's wrong to decide not to create any number of trillions of people that we were planning to yesterday. But it is wrong to plan to create them and then plan to hurt them once they're created. Because that's a very different scenario going on there.
Okay, so let me give you this thought experiment. So, what if I'll give you $5 if you press a button that applies a bunch of radiation to everybody's balls so that they're sterile, right? So you just made 1 billion people impotent by pressing this button, but you got $5. Would you do it?
I would be frustrating a great deal of currently existing people's preferences by doing that.
Okay, but now your argument might be becoming a little circular because I'm somebody who values future people. So why are you frustrating me in this conversation?
Uh, so yes, you do. Okay, so you have a preference for trillions of people in the future. I also have a preference for trillions of people in the future.
Okay, so you're frustrating
So
yourself.
yeah, so I would agree that if by cutting off that future, you are in a sense doing something bad by frustrating current people's ability. I don't think frustrating preferences is as bad as like an 8 billion people large genocide, though.
hmm Yeah, no, look, I agree, right? I'm sympathetic to the idea that like I don't go around knifing people or it's but this gets into the category of arguments of like utilitarianism is full of tricky edge cases, right? Like Pascal's mugging, for example, right, is a tricky edge case. Like there are a lot of tricky edge cases, don't get me wrong. It's just that utilitarianism also gets a lot of things right. And when in doubt, you can always retreat to like really there's like the good side of utilitarianism, which is like, hey, if I have a limited budget, should I donate it to like build an inspiring mural or like feed a bunch of people? Probably feed a bunch of people, right? Like stuff like that, where it's like you sometimes utilitarianism like really dovetails with common sense in a very strong way. And I think giving some consideration to trillions of future people, like a significant amount of, a sizable amount of consideration, but not so much that you go on a stabbing spree. Like if I literally had a button where everybody today dies, but then 1 trillion future people live, that one would be really tough. I don't think it's super obvious that you have to press it. I think that gets into the thorny edge cases, you know what I'm saying? Because of a number of reasons. Like it's the sin of commission. Like, do I really want to be the murderer? That violates a deontological principle. So, like, I agree that gets into like the tricky zone. But I think you are so keen to run away from the tricky zone that you've like really gone to a weird place.
Well, it's just like I don't even think it's really a tricky zone. I think there's all this comes up just like all the time. Like for example, just like an abortion, and also just like the case I mentioned, just like deciding not to have a kid. Like would you just say that because of your view, are you entailed to think that if you and your wife decided not to have a kid tomorrow,
Mhm.
that you've done something at least a little tiny bit wrong? Like is at least a smidgen wrong in that case?
I don't think it's wrong, right? It's quote unquote wrong in the sense of like, hey, I didn't max out my charity donation today, right? So like there's all these things where utilitarianism kind of points you in the right direction. And to the extent you're not maximizing going in that direction, you're wrong in a sense. right? But I'm not somebody who hyper optimizes everything in my life for like maximum utility. And of course, there's all kinds of trade offs like, should I, let's say I think eating meat is morally wrong, but I think eating meat energizes me and makes me 10% more productive so I can do more charity, right? So all of this stuff is in the tricky zone. And I'm not here trying to be like, here's how to navigate the tricky zone. I'm just saying that a button where you build AGI recklessly and cut off trillions of people in the future, I'm very scared of that button. I don't think that we should just like feel comfortable pressing that button because future people don't matter.
I mean, I hear you. I don't know. Like, I think it's like there's a very big difference between aesthetics and like ethical like moral responsibility. I just don't think we have any ethical responsibility to create trillions of people. Like, I don't think that there's any like we have a moral responsibility to like fill up Mars with
Right.
people.
Okay,
I
we don't have a
think
moral
that's
responsibility,
just,
but you want to do it. I want to do it. Most people want to do it. So why not
yeah, but
just
like I
grant
want
this
to
as
eat
like a moral
pie
thing?
too. Because I want to eat
Okay,
pie,
well
but I
then
don't
you
think
should then you should eat pie and you should create a trillion humans.
But I don't think we should make it a moral obligation for like
No,
you
it's
to
not a
help me
moral
eat
it's
pie.
not a moral obligation, but we all want to do it. And now see you're basically admitting you want to do it. I think we probably agree most people want to do it. Most people want to colonize the galaxy in the future. And yet you're also out here saying like, look, if I press a button and that never happens, that's fine. No, it's not fine if
So
it never happens. We want to do it.
okay, well then I will agree with that. What I'll say is this: if most people, and I'm not sure what the majority would need to be, but like if a extremely significant majority of people would be willing to say, hey, I am willing to give up my potential immortality for this aesthetic preference for billions of humans existing in the future. If most people agree to that, then I'd be like, yes, all right, let's do it. And I think I would probably even agree to that myself, probably. And even, but if everyone agreed to that, then I'd be like, yeah, okay, cool, pause AI. If we've all agreed, we took the vote, pause AI. But that's a pretty big ask to give, like, to ask everyone, all 8 billion people to give up their literal immortality for the sake of this like aesthetic preference for a future filled with a lot of people.
Right. So, like, I agree that you have a point, which is saying, like, hey, if people alive today had to agree to all go 6 feet under in order to enable this amazing future with trillions or 10 to the 20, like I agree, again, tricky zone, right? But the reason why I saved this whole part of the conversation till the end, where we talk about whether future lives have value, the reason I saved it to the end is because I still think even if you don't think future lives have value, even if you do think future lives have value, I still think that the policy decision about whether we let AI labs build AGI today, the policy decision still just all comes back to P Doom, right? Which you said yours is 50%, right? But I still think, okay, let's say future lives are worth trillions or 10 to the 20. Okay, great. Should we build AGI? I still think it's like if your P Doom is 5 to 10% or more, probably not. But if your P Doom is like 1%, you can probably go for it and it's fine.
I don't know. I mean, if we're really, because if we take that seriously, I do think you kind of get like, Pascal mugged. Like, I think
Yep.
even like 0.1% is not okay to risk if we're really considering the trillions and trillions
Right.
of future
So,
humans.
but you notice I'm carefully avoiding Pascal's mugging because, like, yes, there is a Pascal's mugging that you could make, or potentially a Pascal's wager. As a technical distinction, I think it only counts as Pascal's mugging if you use like hyper exponential quantities. Otherwise, it's merely Pascal's wager. So, 10 to the 20th
Fair
is
enough.
merely an exponential. It's not a hyper exponential. It's not 10 to the power of 10 to the 20th. That would be hyper exponential. But so anyway, so Pascal's wager would say that even if your P Doom is a mere 0.0001%, you should still never build AGI until you can make it super safe because after all, 0.0001% times negative 10 to the 20th of lives lost is so bad, right? So that would be a Pascal's wager style of argument. And a Pascal's wager style of argument is just characterized by me trying to override a super low probability by multiplying it by a crazy high exponential utility. And I'm not doing that. I'm explicitly conceding, like, look, if your P Doom is 1%, that's okay that you're going to kill a quadrillion lives. That's fine. Just go for it anyway. I'm conceding that. I only take positions that I think are very strong. And the position of, like, we should stop AI progress even if P Doom is less than 1%, I don't think that's a strong position. I think that's a plausible position, but it's not a strong position.
Are you saying you think you have a good reason to escape Pascal's wager in this situation? Like, I want to consider these trillions of humans, but I want to ignore the implications that has for our reasoning process.
No, okay, let me be very precise. So if I were to try to convince you that P Doom of 0.1% is still worth pausing AI for, then the form of my argument would be a Pascal's wager because it would involve a small probability multiplied by a large utility. That's not what I'm doing in this conversation. My claim, my original claim in this conversation is that because P Doom is higher than 5%, and a pretty high P Doom multiplied by a high utility is high,
Sure.
Therefore, we should stop. People get confused because they see really high utilities and they're like, aha, a high utility means Pascal's wager. No, a high utility, that's just a bonus. That just makes my argument stronger, but I'm not multiplying it by a low PDOOM. I'm multiplying it by a
Got it.
very sizable PDOOM. The fact that I can use 10 to 20th on the utility side is just a bonus, but I would argue for it even if it's only the 8 billion people alive today.
Gotcha. So you're saying that you would be in Pascal's wager situation if you had a very low PDOM, but you don't. So you're not trying to use like a Pascal's wager form of argument, but it brings us into this situation where a Pascal's wager becomes possible. And that's like not a fun bullet to bite, but you're just saying, I'm willing to bite that bullet and ignore it because that's not my position.
No, but I'm not biting a bullet, right? Because it's like, I agree. Some people out there have a low PDOOM and they're coming in and they're saying pause AI anyway, which funny enough seems like the mirror image of your position, which is you have a high PDOOM and you want to continue AI.
Sure.
So maybe if I can find somebody like you, maybe I can go find one of these Pascal's wagers. But I'm coming in and I'm not saying anything about what a low PDOOM implies. I'm just saying PDOOM is high and that's why we have to stop AI.
Right. No, I think that what you're saying there makes sense. My only contention is I'm trying to suggest that this is another reason that we should not be considering these trillions of future beings because it could lead us to this weird Pascal situation. I don't think this is a problem for your specific AI Doomer argument.
Sure. Well, I agree that if I were to try to bust out the hyper exponential, like if I were to say, you know what, which is a plausible argument, you know what, AI could discover wormholes and different laws of physics. The multiverse is probably a real thing. And the concept of hyper exponential sentiences is not crazy, right? Like there could be hyper exponential sentiences, absolutely.
Sure.
But I'm not even going there because, again, once you get PDOOM of like 5% plus, a mere 8 billion lives is already, I would consider, pretty high stakes.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just saying that this is just a further reason that I don't think we should be considering trillions of people because
Sure,
it does
yeah.
lead us to these weird issues with rationality.
Yep. Fair enough. Okay, great. So I think we pretty much hit on the key points that we came here to discuss. So maybe synthesize it and give me your closing statement.
Okay, sure. So essentially, I think that if I had to summarize, I would say my P doom for AGI going wrong is somewhere around 50%. My P doom for us failing to coordinate on and also have the technical side of cryonics work out is something higher, like, I don't know, 75%. Therefore, the best chance for people alive right now is to go full steam ahead with AGI, or if not full steam ahead, pretty fast. And then the other side of my argument, I would say, to summarize, is that we should not be considering future people because future people don't exist. If you try to say that they exist, you get all sorts of problems with even just like telling your wife that you're not in the mood one night, or you could be convinced to throw a kid in a volcano to have 10 kids born elsewhere. For all those sorts of arguments, I would say that we can have aesthetics preferences for future possible humans, but we shouldn't have moral obligations for future possible humans.
Okay, I'll say my piece. So we both agree PDOOM is quite high, yet my position is the obvious one of like, okay, let's try to slow down AI development, the thing that we both agree could extinct everybody, and let's try to figure out how to proceed with caution or even not proceed at all, since, again, we both agree we might extinct everybody. Whereas the alternative of saying like, no, let's proceed because everybody is too dumb or incapable of signing up for cryonics and waiting, but like we just have to proceed for their own good and we need it in 10 years because it's available now, right? Like all of a sudden, because we're so close, we have to like get to the end. We have to do the last 5 years now. We have to press the button now, even though it's a button that might be a 50% button of ending the whole future. Like, let's just press it. That just seems like a very weak position to me. Like, I really think you've kind of lost the battle the moment you admit PDOOM from AI is crazy high. Like, I don't think you're going to get a 50% PDOOM from any other path. Here, I'll give you another minute if you want to take the floor because I want you to have the last word.
Oh, thanks. That's fair. Well, I would just say that I don't think it's because everyone's dumb. I think it's just a larger coordination problem going on. And my only other like closing remark would be, yes, I think PDOOM is high. But again, if we're only considering people that are alive today, our PDOOM without AGI is 100%. It gets a little bit lower if you consider the possibility of widespread cryonics, but I don't think it gets as low as the PDOOM for AGI. So that's why I think we should go that route.
Okay, great. So it also sounds like in the course of this debate, your position hasn't moved much, or has it moved significantly?
No, I wouldn't say it's moved much.
Okay, well, I wouldn't say mine has moved much either, but we found a point where we agree, which is that if both of our P-Doom is, let's say, 10% from reckless AGI, and also both of us are skeptical that we can make cryonics work, even pulling out all the stops. So let's say probability of cryonics working is only 10%. And let's say we agree that future generations don't matter and it's all about just rescuing the 8 billion people who are on the way toward dying today. If you assume all of these preconditions at that point, then I think I agree. Okay, screw it, go for reckless AGI. Except I would still argue let's try to take more like 20 years with it. Let's not try to do it in 5 or 10 years, because let's try to maximize the chance of AI safety. Fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I will also say that thinking about it more, I do think that I have one point of concession that I've changed my mind on a little bit. Is I do, after this conversation, think that cryonics is a bit more of a viable option, a viable path to actually try to pursue than I did before, even like at a global scale. Maybe that is something we could work on. And the only thing I will say to what you just said on that is that I would say that it's not just if P doom for AGI going bad is low. It could even be high as long as the P doom of cryonics not working out is even higher. So like if our P doom for AGI is 60%, but our P doom of like cryonics just not working out for new one is 75, we should still do AGI in that case. Mm-hmm. If we, again, if you're right, if we don't care about the future people in that scenario.
If you thought it was 70% likely that after this conversation we can rally the world to get most of humanity on cryonics, and also cryonics had a high chance of working, then would you just be like, okay, great, let's pause AI for now?
Yes, I would.
Wow. Okay, great. So more agreement actually than it seemed initially.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad we came around to that. Okay, great. That's probably going to be one of the higher levels of agreement on Doom debates.
Probably.
Oh yeah, man. Okay, great. Yeah, thanks so much for doing this. And thanks all of you for watching Doom Debates.
Thanks again.